having me. The first thing I want to tell you is the last thing I planned today was to kind of read off of a piece of paper, but my whole story is about authenticity, and I lost my dog this week, so I have a really important message for you. I just did not completely memorize it, and I don't want to miss anything. So I want to start off just giving you guys a few statistics. So currently, 129 people a day die in the US from an overdose. There's now a direct link to teen pot use and significant loss in IQ. Smoking pot at 15 makes you 5 times more likely to develop schizophrenia or psychosis later in life. 1 in 6 teenagers who smoke pot will become addicted. Over 90,000 people a year die from alcohol-related deaths, and 1 out of every 7 people will face addiction in their lifetime. And I see a lot of smiles and a lot of laughs and a lot of ha, whatever, oh my God, I've heard this, BS, it's natural. Well, my name is Danielle Boland, and I'm a person in long-term recovery, which for me means that 6 years ago, I started on a journey without substances in my life, where I try to live consciously and authentically. You are probably expecting I'm gonna stand here for the next 25 minutes and tell you how I lost everything from a rough life of hardcore drug use, but that's really not my story at all. And the message that I wanna communicate is much closer to home than that. We do have a heroin and a pain pill epidemic on our hands, as most of you are aware, and everyone is focused on this right now because yes, it kills people, and often very quickly. Today, however, I want to focus more on the insidious stuff, the stuff you think is no big deal until it is. Basically, the disease of distraction and the lack of connection. The idea of compromising who we are, what we stand for, and missing out on the present moment just to escape or to obtain some short-lived instant gratification. The definition of a high-functioning addict or alcoholic is someone who maintains a good job, nice home, family, friends, while drinking or using drugs or overworking in a way that causes negative consequences to them or to those they are close to. As you'll hear, I literally sat exactly where you guys are sitting, heard similar words, and I assumed it had very little to do with me. But would anything have really stopped me from experimenting entirely? I think about this, probably not, but I do wish that my family had talked openly about alcoholism, depression, and other mental health issues in our lineage, and that I had understood the major implications this could and ultimately would have on my life. And I do wish I understood at that time how the chemicals I put into my body were going to forever alter my brain, my hormones, my nervous system, and my mental health. We do now know that the brain doesn't fully develop until 25. So every time we mess with the brain function before full development, it's a scientific fact. No one's paying me, the government, it's not a conspiracy. We're literally playing with our lives. Today I'll start with my own story, why it's relevant that I'm up here speaking with you, and then I'll just cover a bit of what I see on a daily basis now working in a field of addiction. So I grew up very close to here in a beautiful big house in Upton. My parents are still together, and by all outward appearances, my 3 sisters and I had a great family upbringing. There was no shortage of love. In this very high school, I was class president, president of the National Honor Society, captain and MVP of the varsity soccer team, captain of the softball team, and then because I wasn't as good as I wanted to be at basketball, I had to be the best at everything. I was a horrible cheerleader, so I became the first mascot that we had in the winters. I was always very good at being who you wanted me to be. I knew I was kind of the son my dad never had, so I excelled in sports. I knew colleges wanted extracurricular activities, so I went on a mission trip to Haiti. Lots of stuff like that. What I realize now is that I never took the time to really know who I was and the why, what I wanted out of my life. I never thought exactly about the person I wanted to be someday, like who little me would be proud of. I just wanted to be the person everyone liked and got plenty of attention. The media all around me influenced my life in so many ways I was not then aware of. There was no pause. It was always about going with the current. The first time I can remember really drinking was at a friend's house, probably 8th grade going into 9th, when our older brother had people over while the mom was away. I poured some of my dad's blackberry brandy into a Snapple bottle and snuck it over. I remember the room spinning, puking my brains out, and feeling horrible the next morning to go to work at 6 a.m. at Papagino's. But of course, that didn't change the fact that I couldn't wait to do it again. I loved the feeling of being buzzed from day one. I also had an older boyfriend who by this point had introduced me to pot. I remember campfires in the woods, just chilling with friends, times at the Mendon drive-in, fish bowling the car. I remember telling myself that being the mascot and getting up there and going nuts in front of everyone took a lot of guts. So I was allowed to pour vodka into a scope bottle and drink it right before a few of the games. It definitely made me a better mascot. We would also have a few swigs before dances and then stay at someone's house overnight and drink afterwards. I actually didn't party too often though, because luckily I was so busy with sports and other activities like probably a lot of you. In my mind, alcohol and pot were just normal parts of high school, and there was never even a thought of negative consequences, especially because I had none in high school. I was a total people pleaser. I wanted everyone to like me. Typically, the person with addictive tendencies is someone more likely to be an addict or alcoholic, is the one who can be in a room with 99 people who love them and still be obsessed about the one in the corner who doesn't. At my high school graduation party, I kept going to the keg when no one was looking because I was stressed out about everyone having a good time. What I want all of you to know is I was so busy checking boxes. I made sure to have good grades, be the good athlete. I thought I was invincible, but I was never super focused on my character or who I was as a person without all those things. I went off to college at the one school I applied to, which was Catholic University in DC. I played soccer there, and of course drinking was a huge part of initiation. We had a sober living option at Catholic, and boy, did I love to rip those kids apart. Total weirdos. Who didn't drink alcohol and experiment with drugs? Now, two things come to my mind. Number one, several of those people probably saw the wreckage substances created within their own families and wanted nothing to do with it. And number two, I wonder how my life would be different if at 19 I knew how to be myself and cope with my feelings and just be real without having to put anything in my body. Sophomore year of college, I started dating an older guy back here in Upton, and on one of my visits home, he introduced me to cocaine. I absolutely loved the stuff. I felt invincible, hyper, happy, and like I was connected to everyone. But I was also terrified at how much I loved it. Cocaine really showed me a dark side of where addiction was capable of bringing me. I craved more whenever I had it. Over time, I learned that a lot of the locals in DC at the restaurant I worked also had Coke, so it became pretty easy to get it. Often, females, if you're just kind of hanging out with everyone, don't have to pay, so, that didn't help. I was still so goal-oriented and still wanted everyone to think that I was the greatest, so I partied a lot less than most people, even in college. Like on most weekends when everyone was out, I was working. My senior year, I had a 3.57 GPA. I worked as a waitress, and I worked 30 hours a week at CNN. I worked at Larry King Live during 9/11. What's important to note here still is no one really knew what I was up to. Nothing in my life was affected too negatively on the outside. I'd get Coke sporadically at my work, and I'd do it on the nights when I knew I didn't have much to do the next day. The summer I graduated, I moved back to Upton and got a job working for some big name radio stations in Boston. Eventually, I wasn't around anyone with Coke, so I never did it anymore. So, I just thought it was not a problem. By now, I was an executive assistant for a bigwig, and life consisted of managing him, being backstage at concerts, meeting famous people, being in the box at all the pro sports games, and along with that came lots of opportunities to drink and liquid lunches. I seriously believed that everyone did business drinking at lunch. It was around this time, commuting to Boston, that I stepped up my drinking and driving. One time around 23, I was driving home from the Prue in an ice storm, pretty trashed, flying, and my car spun out into a stone wall a mile from my condo. The airbags deployed, I was bloody, the car was totaled, but it still ran. So I drove it to my house, and I never got in any trouble. This was also a common theme in my life, and I'm sure there are some of you sitting in the audience very familiar with it. For some reason, I seem to almost always get away with stuff and make it out unscathed. The problem with this is it allowed me to justify my behaviors as not that bad. Meanwhile, I had no idea how the chemicals were slowly clouding my judgment and changing who I was. I ended up leaving the radio industry for something promising more money, and I also believed I just needed an atmosphere with less partying. What I didn't realize was that people like me find the party anywhere. I moved over to the high-tech industry and up the ranks from executive assistant to sales executive in no time. I continue to justify nights at the bar or mornings hungover as stuff everyone was doing in their 20s. And to some extent, many people in their 20s do drink alcoholically. I mean, let's just call it like it is. Drinking excessively is actually applauded in our culture, no matter how old you are. I did always, however, have these gnawing feelings like I was selling myself short. Alcohol is the only poison where you actually have to explain yourself if you don't want to put it in your body. So around 25, 26, I get to a point where all I care about is making money and being, quote, successful. The disturbing thing is that I specifically remember, again, in this gym, for my high school graduation as class president, telling everyone in the class that success wasn't about the car you drive or the money in your wallet, but in serving others. I really did believe this, but I never listened to my own words. I just wasn't present and conscious, and I never really paused. I compromised my own values and beliefs, and this allowed enough fragmentation for the darkness to sneak in. I was offered a great opportunity at a large high-tech company, and this is where the downward spiral really began in my late 20s. The culture in my group was very much work hard, play hard. The women in sales were typically attractive and expected to wine and dine clients with corporate credit cards to make the sales. I had no idea, but my continued drinking and hyper-focus on money had caused so many other aspects of my character to fall away. I had zero ability at this point to speak up for myself if it didn't pertain to business, and zero ability to look after myself. I had now been married about 4 years, but was way too busy flying all over the country to put any focus into that. I'd go to outings in Vegas, party in penthouses, and then be up early the next morning at meetings. I'd have to stay out and drink with the guys to avoid getting ragged on. The sad thing is now, I'm strong enough in who I am that I would tell everyone to go take a hike, but I wasn't capable then. Alcohol and weed absolutely changed my brain chemistry over time. Again, this is science, it's not something I made up. And if you don't believe me on the weed, you can come work with me where perfectly normal high school students are now living in special facilities. I honestly would not have believed it either. Anyhow, for me, things were really shifting. Alcohol had been my friend in liquid courage, and it worked so great until it didn't work anymore. On one trip to Seattle, we had just finished up a client dinner with my boss's boss. Later that night, he knocked on my hotel room door and made his way in. I'm sure you can read between the lines of what happened here. I was too scared to tell him to go away. If that stuff happened to anyone I love, I wouldn't be able to handle it. But I had gradually lost my self-worth or my ability to stand firm in my beliefs. Not even sure I knew my beliefs at this point. How far can I go? What would it be like to have one more like on social media, one more dollar, one more drink, one more line, one more guy? At one point, my husband found me passed out in my BMW on the lawn. I had gotten sick on myself. My foot was on the brake with the car still in drive. But I was okay because I was still kicking butt at work and no one besides him knew anything. What happens is you just start to slowly cross lines you never thought you'd cross, until eventually it doesn't matter anymore and you don't even notice. I started going to some AA meetings, sitting in the back of the room, rolling my eyes, thinking I'm so not like these people. I still managed to get even another job offer at a smaller organization. At this time I was hoping I could really fix this stuff on my own and figure it out without help. People knew I was fun, and I was hired there with the expectation of really managing the locker room environment of the sales team. There was a keg in the kitchen, and it ended up that one of the managers I worked very closely with was fond of cocaine. I would go to work, kill it, go to the bar with the managers after work, have someone hand me a bag, do a few lines, go home, and fight to fall asleep so I could do it all again the next day. In a few short months of this, I was promoted to sales director and making $250,000 a year. Right after my promotion, I went away for a weekend and came back with alcohol seeping out of my pores. Same story, different day. I was just so done. I also had a team of people working under me who I cared about and wanted to inspire, and I felt like a complete fraud. Remember, everything in my life looked completely fine to the outside world. I never had a DUI, I had never been arrested or in trouble at work. No one really had a clue what was going on besides maybe a sister who's here today and my husband. But here's the deal, I was now dying inside. I was spiritually and emotionally broken. I knew in my heart I was an alcoholic, I just wasn't the token homeless guy under the bridge. It was no longer fun for me. I seriously had no clue that a little bit of pot here, or a little bit of alcohol there, or a pill with some drinks was ever going to lead to this. 3 days later, on May 22nd of 2013, I made the decision to check myself into a treatment program. I called my boss to tell him what was going on and to be open with everyone in the office. And he told me to do what I needed to do and that my job would be there when I came back. Just to give you an idea of how not socially acceptable getting healthy and recovering and being conscious are, 15 days into rehab, I called the VP friend who always handed me the Coke, and he said, I wish you didn't tell everyone here the truth because the general consensus is that you overreacted. 4 days out of my 28-day treatment, that same boss who had told me he had a problem, but he masked it with exercise, told me my position had been eliminated. A week after that, I got a letter from the insurance company saying none of my treatment was covered because I wasn't that bad. I had a bunch of job offers, but I decided it was time to find me again after 15 years of being pretty lost. I sold my new Jeep Cherokee and spent almost every penny doing a year of work on myself without a paying job. Picture the girl who literally had stacks of shoes she never felt like returning to Zappos, now completely without an income. It was humbling. But for the first time since before high school and sports and awards and social media, I couldn't base my self-worth on anything outside of me. I had to build it from the inside out. Here's the thing, addiction is anything we continue to do that brings us negative consequences, plain and simple. My entire life was reaching outside of myself for an inner peace. And guess what? When you live in such a way, the day never comes. Social media is the worst offender of this now. Instant gratification or approval that is not from in here. And over time, the insides essentially decay because they are not being nurtured. Even if you do not become an alcoholic or an addict, I want you to realize that we live in a world that encourages being distracted, making your ego feel good, and taking the easy way out. I call it living in the fog. And the opposite of this is connection and living authentically and consciously. My message to you is my decline was progressive, but over a very long period of time as the substances, primarily alcohol, actually changed my personality through the years. It caused anxiety, depression, and obsessive thinking, and I had no idea because it's just what everyone did. Being the overachiever or perfectionist does not make anyone immune to this. What I see in my work, because alcohol and weed are so socially acceptable now, is that some people just do too much, too often, for too long, and eventually there is a scientifically proven chemical shift in the body that you just can't come back from. When I speak like this, I reflect back on what I would change, if anything, since it's actually led me to this point. I think my biggest regrets are compromising myself on so many levels and hurting someone who cared about me so much, who is my ex-husband. I'm 39. I never expected to be divorced or without kids at 39. And while I know everything has happened for a reason, this is a direct result of my choices and the things I just didn't know. And then the years of piecing myself back together. The trauma I caused from sexual situations I got myself into, times I compromised my spirit. It's been so much work, so much time. So here's what I would do differently if I were in your shoes today. I would go home and have a real conversation with my parents, find out the real story about addiction and mental health in your family. I wish there had been more conversations around the dinner table about my great-grandmother who had a drinking problem. Or I wish my parents and I knew that my grandmother's eating disorder was in the exact same family as addiction and obsessive-compulsive disorder. Take a long look in the mirror. If you think you might be heading towards an issue and you might not be sure what to do about it, there are plenty of ways to reach out. Here's the thing with addiction. It is a disease of control, either needing to be in control of everything or having the efforts and controlling nothing, or maybe a combination of the two. And it is a family disease. Again, 1 in 7 people today will face addiction in their lifetime. So, I mean, do the math in this room. It's well over, I've got to say, like 50 people. And because of that, 1/3 of all American households are touched by some form of addiction. But when I was younger, because my parents didn't drink too much and we had a nice house and clothes on our back, I had no idea that there were chances of me having these tendencies. Some people can absolutely mess around with this stuff and be okay. I see it every day, but not as many as you might think. If you notice people at home drink a lot, don't be afraid to call them out on it. Sometimes adults say one thing because they know it's right, but they don't necessarily have the strength to do it themselves. Be aware of your family history. Because my dad grew up with a mom who struggled with an eating disorder, again, same family as addiction, he had many of the traits of a child of an alcoholic and then raised a family without even realizing those traits would most likely be passed down. Some of the characteristics you can expect from kids who grow up in a house with addictive tendencies and very high functioning substance abuse include, but are not limited to, being rigid and inflexible, difficulty trusting, being closed off, shame and loneliness, self-criticism, perfectionism, people-pleasing, being highly sensitive, being overly responsible, being anxious or depressed. Next, I would get very clear on who you are and who you want to be. Maybe think of a timeline from your death backwards. Get real with it. Who do you want to be remembered as? Do you want your kids to be proud of the human you became? Once I got sober, it took me years to figure out who I was, because for so many years I just did what everybody else did. I didn't have a lot of hobbies or things that made me super happy. Find those. And for some of the athletes here, be honest with yourself. Is it occupying your time and checking a box, or does it bring you joy? It's okay if it's just occupying time and checking a box, because it's not necessarily bad either. But know that you will need to find things that bring you joy. Do you? This is not a typical path in our world today. There's a kind of general rule of society of going to college, having 2.5 kids, 1 dog, the McMansion, and maybe you really want that, but get clear on your own before you start moving in a direction that may not be yours. Lastly, ask yourself how you handle life when things get bad. My mentor, Tommy Rosen, says it will not matter how much money you have, it will not matter how many fans or likes you have, it will not matter what stature you're able to rise to. The only measure of success will be how you respond to life when the universe acts the way you don't want it to. Ask yourself if you share your emotions with others or you fear being judged, and if you have coping skills to calm or soothe yourself in tough times. I had none of that, and I didn't know it. If not, just know that there will be a crack again for the dark stuff to slip in. Today, I can honestly say 100% without question that I am and continue to be the person little me would look up to. That means so much to me after everything I have been through. Right after getting sober, I started advocating at the State House and became the first Massachusetts chapter lead for young people in recovery. Without going into detail, I did fight what happened with my job and won. For reference, there is a loss. You cannot lose your job if you go into any type of treatment, but people are sometimes too scared to stand up to that. I stood up to a bunch of bullies in suits and ties with self-proclaimed power in just my first few months of sobriety. A year into recovery, I decided to start my own business doing interventions and high-end recovery services for executives, adolescents, and their families. We help get loved ones the help they need and educate families about addiction. I'm now the person who has all of these people coming to me who seem to have life made on the outside, but are struggling on the inside. I also do sober companion work where I stay with people for a few weeks while they get sober. I've stayed with people in Hollywood. I was even at Adam Levine's Halloween party 4 years ago, completely sober. Last week again, I was in Los Angeles coaching the 2018 Spotify Songwriter of the Year, and then assisting at a yoga festival in Malibu. This week, I'm buying another business where I will go into big companies and train people on how to be their best. I feel like it's full circle. I'm so excited to continue helping people be their best self on a bigger scale, but with a much healthier foundation under my feet. In November, I was in the middle of a 40-day meditation because today I have the discipline to do that. It was 2.5 hours a day, and I was so in tune with my body that I found out I had cancer, had been growing in me, maybe even since my teens. There is no way I would have found it or that it would have healed so quickly through treatments if I didn't decide to stay sober and fully conscious and present in my life. People would say, wow, since you have cancer, don't you want to drink? I mean, you should. And I was finally in a place where I was like, no way. I'm ready to be fully present in every single moment of my life. Emotionally present to the people who I love. Like I told you guys last week, my dog died and I'm heartbroken. He was like my child. Picking up a substance wasn't an option. I felt all the pain fully, and that is where our growth comes from. The choice today, in every moment of your life, is yours. Do you want to get clarity on your values and the things that mean a lot to you and live them out? Can you put the hard work? Can you put in the hard work and prolong the instant gratification for the long-term sustainable rewards? Or do you want to be stuck in your own mind, answering the physical, mental, and spiritual cravings inside? Marianne Williamson says, just like the cells in the body, every single human being is special and unique. The body would not function the same without each and every cell doing its job. Just like the world needs each and every one of you for your own unique gifts. Choose to be real and live consciously so that you can bring your bright, big, beautiful light out to the rest of the world. Thank you.